Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
A man of wealth, a student of science, and a master of other people's minds, devotes his life to righting wrongs, protecting the innocent, and punishing the guilty. Cranston is known to the underworld as the Shadow. Never seen, only heard, his true identity is known only to his constant friend and aide, Margot Lane. Today's story, Death Stalks the Shadow.
Welcome to Nightlight. Thank you for joining us. Hope everyone's having a great week. We have another new guest with us tonight. Martin Grams is going to be with us for the next couple hours. I'm sure most of the listeners know that very recognizable introduction to the Shadow radio show. Would be a good way to start our exploration of classic TV and radio shows. Like I said, Martin Grams is our guest, and he is not letting us forget the shows that were the foundations of late night radio and TV. It's part of our history, President Roosevelt's fireside chats, the War of the Worlds with Orson Welles, and of course the Shadow. And our loyal listeners in Barnsley and our special friend in Coventry may have had the same experiences with George VI. There's a big movie out just a few years ago about early English radio. But this was the golden age of radio before Nightlight returned it to that status. But what we do here on Nightlight is could we say it's an extension of the Shadow? So we'll explore that topic in just a minute. And here's a little bit about Martin. He is the author and co-author of more than 30 successfully published books, including The Shadow, The Green Hornet, and The Twilight Zone. Martin has written over 500 magazine articles, is a research consultant for a publishing company, and is events coordinator for the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention, an annual nonprofit film festival that benefits children with treatable cancer. Martin is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Rondo Award and the Ray Stanich Award. You can learn more about him by going to his website, martingrams.com. So let's bring on Martin. How are you, Martin?
Well, fine. Thank you for asking, and pleasure to be on the program tonight.
We are glad to have you. We worked a little bit in the past, and we actually got to meet last year at the Rod Serling Twilight Zone conference in Binghamton, New York. Be talking about that, and later in the program. But when we were talking, it was on the Saturday of the conference. We were chatting, in between speakers, and I was going through your shadow book, and you had a number of other books there, but I was really drawn to the shadow, and I was just flipping through it, and that's just really a fascinating subject. Barbara and I kicked around some ideas. Let's play the shadow introduction for the beginning of the show. And then later in the day, there were the actors who put on a radio performance of Rod Serling's first radio play. It was interesting to see how that was done. It just really opened me up to the connection between those early days and what we do now. The Shadow came out almost 90 years ago. What is it that drew you to write about the Shadow?
Well, the radio program was a kindred spirit to me. I listened to the program when I was a child, and it was what got me hooked on the old-time radio. I thought the show was cool. It took until the third episode that I realized he was invisible because, I wasn't actually comprehending as a young kid what was going on. And it was a crime caper. He was partly a masked vigilante superhero. I say masked because he was technically upside down. I mean, invisible in a sense. So it wasn't like the same old routine where someone else is personally, in costume like you see in the movies and firing guns or blazing like he is in the pulps. And over the years, I realized there was very little written about the Shadow. And after a while, I realized they were all conflicting with certain information. And I finally just decided I might as well do something, and spent about, I'd say, 10 years doing research. An example would be one of the sponsors was Goodrich, and they are out of Akron, Ohio. So on the way back from a convention in Columbus, Ohio, I stopped at Akron at the Goodrich Archives, and they had a few files from the corporate office regarding the radio program. And that would be say, 1 out of 60 or 70 archives across the country that over a period of years I eventually started putting together magazine articles, and then it branched out into a big book. And the one thing I discovered was that radio back then was live. So unless there was a logistic reason, whether it be financial or legal, they never recorded the programs because it costs money, and business is all about money. So I'd say about 50% of the radio broadcasts, if not a little bit more, do not exist in recorded form, which means I had to track down the radio scripts, which means I had to track down the copyright holders and go through their archives on microfilm where they had all the radio scripts there. And then I found hard copies of first drafts of the scripts. So I had to read them and get all the plot summaries. So you could say it was something that I guess as a 6-year-old I never realized where it was going to take me. But the completion of the adventure was publishing an 800-page book and documents all the details about the radio crime fighter and the television attempts and the cliffhanger serial and other incarnations of the Shadow. And then, of course, that was just one of many books, and that's why I'm here tonight with you. But yeah, it got started when I was just a kid, and you never know, if you expose old-time radio or old black and white television shows to kids when they're 6, 7, and 8 years old, you have no idea where that could lead.
That's interesting. For something like this, you're going to, the Goodrich Tire Archives in Akron, Ohio. But I was listening to a few episodes on YouTube, and there are a lot of really positive comments left on YouTube, and there are the Goodrich Tire commercials on there from 1938, 39, and that time period. But you're right, Martin, that you don't know where the research is going to take you, and it just picturing going to the corporate offices at Goodrich just doesn't seem to be a logical place to do something like this, but that's where it took you. And it is interesting where these different paths can lead a researcher. But one of the things really captivated me about your book while I was going through, like I said, while one speaker wrapped up and another one was setting up his or her speech, was that Orson Welles was the original voice of Lamont Cranston. How did he? Where did he come from to get that job? Because he's a pretty young guy in the late 30s.
Correct. He was probably 22, maybe 23 at the time when he took on the assignment. It really was to fund his New York stage plays. He was part of, him and John Houseman were putting together what they called Mercury Theater, and they would do innovative stage plays on Broadway and off-Broadway, and it was in New York, and sometimes the plays were big hits, critically acclaimed, a huge box office, and then other times they were not so critically acclaimed in box office, and to offset the expenses, he would do radio. And he did radio as far back, at least I have been able to document, around 1934 or 35. And then The Shadow came around the fall of 38, and it was just a quick weekly money maker where he can come in, play the lead, make the advertising agencies happy, make the sponsors happy, and then go back to the theater in time to do the next stage drama. And it helped pay the bills, and one could say he was robbing Peter to pay Paul, or taking a part-time job just to make ends meet, but in many cases back then it was the only way. He only did 1 year, and then he did some syndication discs, which is recording them in a studio in advance, and then they put them on disc and send them out to different areas of the country, because the sponsor was Blue Coal, and their product would only go as far west as Chicago, as far north as New England, and as far south as Virginia. Nobody bought coal down in Florida or any of those areas, southern states. So the discs for the syndicated ones, which he did in a studio, all of them survived because they were pre-recorded, of course. Those were sent out various areas of the country. So some areas of the country heard some broadcasts, other areas heard different broadcasts. It's a very fascinating history on how the broadcasting was done, but Orson Welles technically did the first year, and then he decided to accidentally panic America and with a fake Martian broadcast. And the end result was basically he's going to Hollywood because he just got a contract, and in came Bill Johnstone, who was the second actor to play the Shadow, who most people are familiar with as well because he did a pretty good job, and majority of his broadcasts exist in recorded form.
Okay, and like you said, at the beginning of the show, the Shadow really was just a voice that was heard by the bad guys, the underworld type figures in the each episode. What was the Shadow like a supernatural type character, like we would have a little later on with like the Superman TV show, and you get the kryptonite is his weakness, but most of the time he's able to defeat the bad guys on that episode, without them knowing about his secret weakness. Was there something like that in the Shadow's history?
Not per se. I wouldn't say he had a kryptonite, a weakness. He, as they defined in DC's Watchmen, which was brilliant, the difference between a superhero and a mass vigilante would be that a superhero truly is super. They've got abnormal powers like Superman, Wonder Woman, and so on. And then people like Batman and so on, they're just mass vigilantes. They just get into a costume and they have some small abilities, and that's the difference. The Shadow was never really a superhero per se. He went to the Orient. He learned how to cloud men's minds. So basically, you walk into a room and you don't realize it, but he just hypnotized you, and you cannot see him. And that was his basically only superpower, was being invisible. And then once in a while, you'd have villains who would create monsters or let loose the dogs, and of course, you can't hypnotize them. And there was always some sort of little every third or fourth episode, the villain found a way to actually go, oh, you know what, he is human. All you have to do is trap him or send out the dogs or something, and that was what the procedure was. You could say he was a bit of a fraidy cat because he really just he was only good when he was invisible. But what he did is he would play the role of a guilty conscience. One of the early Shadows that I liked was that where cars were being exploded throughout the city, and no one could figure out where and when the bombs are being planted. And about halfway through, or two-thirds of the way through, the Shadow figures it out. It's like a mystery, as normal. And it turns out there's a madman in the sewers, and what they will do is move the manhole, plant the bomb on the bottom of the car, and replace the manhole. And so he goes down and he talks to the guy, and of course the old man can't see him, and the old man's demented. And somewhere along the line, the Shadow has convinced him that he's mad and he's just as bad as the people who deserve the punishment. And the episode ends, the Shadow escapes, and the old man blows himself up. And that's the end of the episode. So again, he's invisible, he can't be seen, he's just a guilty conscience. But the show was unique because they did not have one or two staff writers writing all the scripts. They had a variety. And so one was known for writing mysteries, another did horror, another did detective fare. So each episode was never the same thing, and you could hear 6 or 7 episodes and realize it was not a cookie-cutter format per se. And I think that's what makes it amusing. You can't do it today. It looks lame when you have somebody invisible on the screen, among other things that they did on the show. And the dialogue's a bit hokey and so on. But when one, dismisses the hokiness of sorts with the dialogue and says, hey, okay, this is 1930s. I'm going to put myself in the 1930s, 40s perspective. It's the old gangsters with automatic guns and repeating rifles and grenades and kidnapping scientists because they know their secret weapons and secret agents overseas and lots of fun like that. I've always had, if I had a pill, I would say, what would it be like if you were a kid in the 1930s or 40s, and how would you grow up with role models that they would have created through pop culture, whether it be the Lone Ranger, Green Hornet, or the Shadow? And so that's always been my pill and my enjoyment. And thankfully, with old-time radio, there are so many recordings and still being discovered to this day that there's always going to be recordings I've never heard. And probably 20 years down the line, there will still be recordings found in archives that I will be enjoying. Well, it's good for a long drive, and that's what I enjoy. But that's kind of how the Shadow works. Is he wasn't really a superhero; he was just a masked vigilante. But in this case, he wasn't even a masked vigilante. He did not really have to be in costume, like that hawk nose and the hat and all you see on the art of the pulp magazine.
When we had our buddy Mark Eddy on a few weeks ago, we got into the hokiness of Carl Kolchak and some of the monsters that looks like you could probably see the zipper going up the back of the monster's costume, and Carl's driving to where they found the body, and it gives the day of right around Thanksgiving in Chicago, and he's driving around his yellow Mustang with the hood down, and all the trees are in full bloom. Okay, I've never been to Chicago, but I probably have a good feeling that there aren't trees and bloom in around Thanksgiving time. So but it's those little things like that. Yeah, the little hokey thing that does. But I don't know what you call it. It does make things. These shows endearing. It's kind of low budget, but at least we watch that. The performers do the Rod Serling's first radio script. They're just using shoes to pound on the desk to make sound like someone's running. It's really not big budget kind of special effects that we're so used to today. Or just different medium.
And they always say today's computer is going to be tomorrow's Atari special effects. The visuals are not going to be as in tune. The defects will come out. Same thing with the old movies and TV shows and radio shows. There'll be a little bit of the things that we kind of have to temporarily put aside. A little kid would look at some of them and say, there's no color. Or they'll look at it and say, oh, look, that's an old car. How can they be driving that? Where's the? Why do they have to go to a payphone? Why is this thing called a party line? But the reality is they're just not educated to understand, and it's an opportunity for all of us to kind of give them a nudge and explain to them what it is they're watching and why it was back then. And then after that, they're okay with it. And so, yeah, we see that a lot in those old films, but that's part of the fun, too, is the history.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, what I really wanted to focus on tonight is, your subject's a little bit of a departure from our usual subject material, but it's really not, because Barbara and I really enjoy looking at history as well as preserving it, and in a little bit, we'll be looking at your Twilight Zone book, but just having time to go through your shadow book, there was just something that really caught my eye about where people like heroes like Orson Welles are just getting their start. Then there's Agnes Moorehead was involved in the is that right? And then you get some of these people in the like first season of The Shadow, and within a couple years they've moved on to RKO, and they're all working on developing Citizen Kane. That's just a fascinating couple years in Orson Welles' life, and you're documenting that in your book. And what was the what's the inside story going from the getting the experience from The Shadow, the War of the Worlds, and Citizen Kane?
Well, Orson Welles pretty much did what everyone else did. Radio was basically a way to make some extra money. It was considered a throwaway medium. That means when they're done the drama, the scripts would go into a box in the corner as everyone left the studio, and at the end of the day, most of them were thrown in the dumpster because it wasn't like they were going to reperform the same script again. So, and if they were, they duplicate them again later. It was always a different script. So being a throwaway medium, it was just quick pocket money. It was a nice job, nice gig as they could get it. In many cases, they learn how to do dialect and how to speak proper for the radio. That way, when they're delivering, they can't speak too fast. They cannot speak too slow. They have to know timing and delivery. They have to know how to sound like they're having a real conversation instead of he reads one line, she reads her line, he reads his line. You have to have like the last syllable of this last sentence overlapping the first syllable of the next sentence. So it's like a real conversation. It's a different form of acting, but it's a good stepping stone for doing Broadway. And, of course, everybody who did New York stage and radio, their goal was to go to Hollywood. So Welles never anticipated a panic broadcast when he did War of the Worlds, though years later he would brag and his stories would change here and there when he'd do his interviews. But he never predicted it, but it did lure a sponsor for the program. It did lure him to go to Hollywood with a contract from RKO. And, of course, he told all his friends, Agnes Moorehead being one of them, and, Everett Sloan and Joseph Cotton and all them doing roles on Mercury Theater radio broadcasts, said, and on the stage, and said, hey, I've got a job. I'm going Hollywood. And everyone wanted to go to Hollywood. That was always like the end game. So he took his friends and said, I'm going to Hollywood. Who wants to be in it? I'm going to make a movie, and the studio is going to pay for it. And that's what happened. And so everyone from Agnes Moorehead and Everett Sloan said, what have we got to lose? We'll go to California. If it doesn't work out well, you get on a plane or train and you go back to California. You go back to New York and you're back where you started. It doesn't hurt. And so that's why they all went to California, is just basically go make a movie. And some of them, like Agnes Moorehead, stayed in California.
Okay, cool. And the, what the Shadow Radio show began like 1939, and it was actually on for a very long time. What was the longevity of that show? It's like you're doing research at the Goodrich archives enough to create this 800-page book. I mean, it's like there must have been a lot of material you found over about the very long time it was on the air.
Correct. Yeah. I've always said you spend more time researching. Typing is pretty quick. I've been known to type a book in less than a month, but I consider it data entry. And once you're done researching, you just pile your information, chronological, and how you're going to put it into the manuscript. The longest time it took actually was to read something like 900 radio scripts because, like I mentioned, half of them do not exist in recorded form. There was a point where Charles Michelson, who was doing the recording, he would syndicate them in areas across the country where blue coal did not reach, and the end result was he would have different sponsors in those areas. So somewhere around 1944-45, he made a business decision and said, well, why do we have to keep recording them? We've got more than 200 of these in stock. I think that's plenty. And so for the majority of them, they stop around 44 and 45, and then they're just sporadic after that for whatever rare reasons they were recorded. And that was why we have so many missing. So I had to spend plenty of time reading all the scripts, and that's where I would put in a plot summary, and maybe I would dedicate an entire 10-hour day here at the house and read a bunch of scripts and do plot summaries. But when you're talking 900 some radio scripts, that can be a good 3-4 month challenge. Becomes, it's almost like binge watching or binge listening. Somewhere you have to clear your head, go take a walk, do something else. So it's never anything that can be done straight from beginning to end without going crazy. With about 10 years worth of research, what I did is I put it all into a book. It just piled up. But the main important part was, even though 3 episodes fit on a page, when you put plot summaries for lost episodes, fans of the program are very appreciative that they can actually at least enjoy the adventures that they could not enjoy otherwise. So it was kind of essential. When you talk 900 scripts, there's about 300 pages out of an 800 just on the plot summaries alone. And then there's photographs and all the other stuff. So it just piles up. There's been times I've actually tried to remind myself not to write thick books, but it's just a matter, I'd rather have a book I can pull off and there's everything I want under one cover versus holding back. And I know one guy who was a fan of The Shadow and had written some articles and not much of anything else, once criticized anyone who wrote books and said there should never give away everything. You know, there should always be a historian who knows more than what's all in the books, and sometimes the minutia and details is just a waste of space and just causes book prices to go up. And I get his point, but my opinion is, you don't have to read the footnotes. You don't have to read all the plot summaries, but in many cases, what people are looking for in the books is they'd rather get an 800-page book that documents the series and know they can turn to it at any time. And for the most of it, other than the plot summaries for the episodes, they can read it from the first page to the last. So, but if they're not a fan of The Shadow or they never enjoyed the radio show, they don't have to read the book either. There's other books, but for me, it's a niche crowd and it's a hobby per se. So it gives people, it's a sense of accomplishment knowing that I preserved something that's not existing out there, such as plot summaries for recordings and the history aspect. If I could find some old articles in the 30s or 40s where Orson Welles was talking about his role and the participation in The Shadow, I'd reprint that. It's a nice write-up, but I always feel I'm preserving something and leaving my mark or contribution to preserving the arts in some way. And that's basically the reason I do the books.
We applaud your efforts. That's what Barbara and I do want to get out there to the audiences, and I think we've done that on many shows, and we'll continue doing that as we get closer and into starting our second year together. So, so another one of your books is you have one on the late 50s TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Hitchcock is venturing into this new medium at the height of his creative powers in movies. He was making in the middle of a string of making a string of movies that revolutionized the suspense horror genre with Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds, and Hitchcock's doing this TV show. Where did he? How did he get from the movies to doing these TV shows? Other than he's getting paid.
Well,
how did he get lured into?
He was actually pretty much a director per se from the very beginning. He wrote a lot of scripts in England. Then he came to America and directed movies, and he discovered the Hollywood studio system. It was around 1954 or 55 that Lew Wasserman, who was in charge of Universal Studios at the time, approached him and said, look, television is pretty much coming into being now. It would be pretty cool if you had your own show and you hosted it. It would build up a little bit of prestige, kind of make you a household name. He said, because right now you're just known as a director, and this would make you not only famous, it would boost box office potential. And he was the only person that Alfred Hitchcock listened to when it came to finances. So Hitchcock formed Shamley Productions, which was a production company to make TV shows. And Shamley was the name of his estate over in England. And he basically, with his production company, hired the right people involved, and they put together the series under his oversight briefly. He insisted it had to be adapted from short stories that were already published, therefore they'd be somewhat successful than just coming up with an original idea and hoping it would work. And then he directed 2 or 3 each year, and the rest he never directed, but he hosted them, and he absolutely loved doing the show, mainly except for the directing few episodes. He just came in and would do 4 or 5 opening and closing narrations, then come back a month later and do another 4 or 5. It was a quick one-day thing. And in the meantime, he made his movies, and Lew Wasserman was correct that over a year or 2 of the show, and it did not take long, people started wanting to go see the movies directed by Hitchcock, who they see every week on TV. And that was when he became an overnight sensation, not just any old director who was there in Hollywood just doing directing. And he did pretty good with the show, and even used his TV crew to make a movie eventually in 1960 called Psycho. So it was on a low-budget sense, but he did very, very good financially from that, and I think that set him up for life and a lifetime contract with Universal Studios, where all his movies after that would come out through Universal. So it was kind of like he got the keys to the kingdom, and instead of disliking the Hollywood studio system, he kind of owned a piece of it.
That's interesting because I didn't realize that for Psycho he was using the TV, like more of a TV crew to film what would be probably the grandfather of all slasher movies. But because he, the quite a few movies prior to Psycho, like they were all colorized, and Psycho is just. Now that you mention it, it does have more black and white 1950s TV feel to it. That was something interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, historically looking back, the movie he did before that was North by Northwest, which was a $3 million VistaVision full-color adventure film with Cary Grant. And Psycho was inspired because he had seen a couple of these movies like I Was a Teenage Frankenstein and so on that were making huge money. But then he realized the money was huge because the budgets were low. And he decided, well, why can't I use my own TV crew this summer between seasons and create a movie? And he did, and then decided I'm going to do some things different. Going to kill off the leading lady 1/3 of the way through. I'm going to have her killed while she's in the shower. It's more of what they call a psychological thriller, which is more like a mystery with a little bit of a bloody sense in per se. And this is basically someone who was psychotic and was under the radar, and people didn't catch on to that. And basically he made a ton of money, and the film did extremely, extremely well. Critics hated him, but then again, he kind of neglected the critics for that film because they like to give away endings, and he said, no, you can't do that, and so on. But no, he did very, very good with it. But most people forget before and after, he's doing these massive full-color $3 million productions, and then he's putting together a movie that costs something like $50,000-$60,000. And most people are probably going, what the heck is this? But he basically scared the pants out of people, and that was what he wanted to do. And I guess you could say he was laughing all the way to the bank.
Okay, and Martin, what do you think is the legacy of the Alfred Hitchcock Presents show?
Oh, the television show still today. It's still being sold on DVD, still being aired on TV. MeTV, Antenna TV is airing them. I think even Cozy TV might be now. Just in the reruns, the studio is still making money off it. It's a popular show too, because people who have watched it realize you don't have to have heart. There are these cute little mystery stories with a twist ending. Some guy tries to kill the wife and then discovers at the end that there's a twist surprise to it, or a practical joke goes afoul. And they're little grisly stories, but they were quite fun, and they were above average. And so, they still hold up to this day, just like Twilight Zone and many other programs. They're still just as popular. They may not have as many fan clubs or merchandise, but I would say Alfred Hitchcock Presents is still just as popular. In fact, I think the last 3 years, when it was called Alfred Hitchcock Hour and it extended to an hour in length, that's getting ready to come out commercially on DVD, I think, this Christmas, which basically shows you that even up to this point where DVD sales are diminishing over time because people are doing more streaming, they're still willing to put it out because they know there's a market for it.
Yeah, and speaking of the Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock introducing the topic of the show, we have to get a little bit into one of your passions as well as mine. I know Barbara's a big Twilight Zone fan as well. When we've had I said Mark Louisiak and Nick Parisi as guests, and Nick was on just a couple days before his Dimensions of Imagination book came out. But as we get into like the 1959 time period, Hitchcock and Rod Serling are uh, you, become the faces of these, what's going to become just classic TV series, and they're doing these introductions. Can you tell us a little bit about any of the similarities or contrasts that the Hitchcock and Rod took in introducing the episode for that evening?
Yeah, it was kind of a simple hosting chore, which I've always believed was a carryover from the old radio shows where you had a radio host, whether it be an old witch, Nancy of Salem, which was for The Witch's Tale, or the old man in the hermit's cave. I always believed that it was basically they just needed a host to open and close the broadcast. For Rod Serling, the narration in the beginning, and then, of course, his on-screen intros, was really just to introduce the scenarios. Sometimes he gave the explanation to what you just saw and what you will continue to see for the rest of the broadcast. Other times he would just introduce the name of the person, where they're located, kind of creating what they would do in stage work, which was the name of the character, the situation, location, and the date if it's in the far future or in the past. And Hitchcock, on the other hand, did a different type of narration. He liked to make fun of the sponsors. So they had a nice, witty man named James Allardyce, and he would sit there and write up these things at the last minute. He worked best at the last minute, so they'd panic. But then, sure enough, the morning of, and Hitchcock never questioned a single word, went in and just did them. And literally just he read them, he got up, he did it, droll British humor. Sponsors were a little concerned at first because he's making fun of the sponsors, but then when the product started selling off the shelves, that became a big deal, and then they didn't care because they realized what he was doing. He credited that to like an old car salesman who on TV would joke about the car and say, "Oh, the tires won't puncture because they're filled with cement, and it's a real honey, it's dripping oil." And he always said that was the mechanic who sold more cars. And in reality, it was not taken very well in other countries. So Hitchcock, believe it or not, for at least a few seasons in the early years, recorded 4 different openings. He could speak French and German. So he'd do one in England making fun of Americans instead of the products, and then he would do it again in French and then again in Germany, so that when the show aired in those countries, there'd be a different opening and closing. And that was basically Hitchcock's rendition. But a lot of programs still to this day have their own narration to introduce anthology series.
Yeah, and Hitchcock and Rod just had those very distinctive voices. And we could also include Orson Welles. Too, in this, but all of them had that just unique voice that you knew who they were, and you still know who they are today.
Oh yes, Orson Welles knew how to do delivery. That I will give. He could give the right pauses and mannerisms. And I think every host has their own mannerisms, and those go over very well with the audience. Ironically, Orson Welles Rod Serling for a brief time wanted Orson Welles to do the opening and narrations, but then Welles declined, and then he tried to get Westbrook Van Voorhees, who did the first unaired pilot, and then that was too expensive, and Serling finally said, "I'll keep the budget down, I'll do it." And then beginning for the second season, he would start appearing on the screen. So a lot of times they did it out of necessity and not just out of what became now primal characteristic of the program.
Yeah, and Martin, I do have your Twilight Zone book, and it's the Twilight Zone Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. You have a foreword by George Clayton Johnson. Who is he, and how did you get the foreword? Get him to do the foreword?
Oh, well, George Clayton Johnson was a fantasy science fiction writer. He was part of a group that used to come up with different stories and write stories in California. They'd have meetings once every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was a little club in-group. He wrote scripts. He got his start on Twilight Zone, so it seemed fitting for him to write a foreword. And I did not approach him originally. I was talking to him about the book and that I was putting together a book on the show, and then he said, "Oh, I'd love to write a foreword. I've always come up with this great idea where I could write a letter to Rod Serling, who's up there in heaven, and just tell him, hey, Rod, I know you're reading this, and this is what's the great stuff that's come along since then. Thank you very much." And he then kind of kept coming up with this another bizarre idea and another bizarre idea. Then he went back to the first idea. And then I just realized eventually he wanted to write the foreword. So I said, yeah, I'll give you a spot. And he did, and very nice guy. But he wrote the foreword because he was involved with it. Sometimes forewords are nice just to get somebody's name on the cover. You know, like let's say you write a book about a horror show. Stephen King could rave that it's one of the best horror shows ever done on TV. But to get him to write a foreword, he knows it just means his name's on the cover. It's going to sell additional books. For me, George Clayton Johnson's name is not Stephen King, but it was just one of those tributes he wanted to give to Rod, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity, and why not? So that's how that foreword came out. So that very few books that I've done have a foreword for them, but that one did, just because it was more of a gift to George, so George could give a gift to Rod Serling.
Yeah, this is, as we talk about the Twilight Zone, you know, it's the greatest TV show ever, and I don't think there's anything that will ever be created that would rival the Twilight Zone. But in your book, you do have information in there about some of the bloopers, and one of your presentations at the conference last year did cover some of the bloopers. That was interesting. Maybe spend a little bit of time just to talking about. Okay, so we've already looked at some of the corniness of some of these early shows, but okay, we're all like that. Barbara and I are goofy at times, but there's something far more respectable. But there are some of those little mistakes that happen, or repetition of like the same posters. Can you tell us about those little things to look for in some of these episodes that show that the same sets were used?
Oh yeah, it's standard of television production. Back then, people watched the program once a week, and were not meant to be watched like they are today, where you can pop a DVD in and watch 10 episodes back to back. So recycling sets, props, the same posters and paintings hanging on the wall in the background. That a lot of that stuff was filmed at movie studios, and so they would rent them or borrow them from the prop department. And in the long run, a lot of that now we can sit back and watch, sort of like Robbie the Robot. And you needed a robot, you go to MGM, you pay them, and so Robbie the Robot shows up on an episode of Addams Family and an episode of The Thin Man and 2 episodes of Twilight Zone. and all those other programs that were basically produced out of MGM Studios. So for Twilight Zone, when I wrote the book on the history of it, I thought it'd be nice to go through, rather than critical analysis, which is what a lot of people seem to do in their books, which is all fine, but I wanted to avoid that. What I did is I went through all the details, as you mentioned, the bloopers, the trivia, the props that are recycled and reused, so that progressively people can go, oh, yeah, that is the same prop. I'll be darned. Oh, that's the same Beethoven music notes painting hanging on the on the wall in the background in 3 episodes of the first season. And certain props we like to play. One looks like a little white horse, and it shows up, I think, once or twice in the second season and a couple times in the third season. So we have a game called Find the Horse, because we're all determined to say it's going to show up in another episode. I'm pretty certain it won't by this point, but that was that slideshow presentation I did last year. Thankfully, I had that on the Dropbox, and that was from another convention, and they were able to call that up, and so I filled in an hour for them, simply just by going through and winging it. But there was a lot of inside trivia and fun, and I figured the audience had seen Twilight Zone enough that they would have found that more fun than just another recap of the history. And that's kind of what my book does. So even if they've seen the episodes 2 or 3 times, even the best of episodes, the book gives them reason to actually go back and watch it again. Or if they're, say, there's a marathon on Sci-Fi Channel or whatever, they could pull the book out during the commercials, do a quick read up, and go, oh, there's going to be the shadow of the boom mic hanging from the ceiling up above and coming up. Or, oh, so-and-so does this, and then it reappears by accident. And it's not even a book about bloopers. It's all the behind-the-scenes makings, how this special effect was done and so on. And it works, and it comes down to basically the book that people, I guess they always wish there was. And it's not about Rod Serling. It's about the Twilight Zone, but it gives them a complete date breakdown, why they did 6 episodes on videotape versus film, where they were filming some of the desert scenes. It actually was in Death Valley in one, and then they went back and started doing them up in Lone Pine for the deserts and so on. So it gives them an idea of how television production was made based on, progressively as you read a book, you know what an insert shot is. Like a close-up, the camera guy looks at his wrist, and then all of a sudden you see a close-up of the wristwatch so you know what time it is, and then it cuts back to the guy where he puts his hand down. Well, that's actually called an insert shot. In other words, they insert it. So while they're filming, he'll lift up his arm and look at the watch, and then after about 5, 6, 7 seconds, he'd lower it down and continue acting. And then during lunch break, they'd have a stand-in or 2, and they say, for example, 1 man and 1 woman. It was generally the routine. The man might put the wristwatch on his wrist, and they'd film a close-up shot of the wrist with the watch. So it's never the same actor that has a wristwatch, but that's what then they do what they call the insert shot, and they'd insert it into there. So the actor doesn't have to stand around doing this silly little shot where they might have to get the camera and the lighting and the reflection off the glass done right. As they read the book, they get a detail how television in general was produced back in the 1950s and 60s, and it worked out well. I think a lot of people now look at television a little bit different because they know how it's being made, and in some cases, production values or story strategy, they know they can predict what's coming up. And a funny example, my wife likes cars. She's a tomboy. And MeTV plays Hawaii Five-0. And in the closing credits, they always acknowledge Ford Motors, which, of course, is all the police cars and the detective cars. And then whenever there's a car chase and the bad guys are trying to flee, my wife will go, that car is going to go over the cliff and go explode. I said, how do you know? She goes, it's not a Ford. And sure enough, that villain's car will go over the cliff 2 minutes later in the car chase and explode and break up because Ford was the sponsor, so they don't want their cars going up and getting destroyed. And it's like I said, once you know how television's production kicks in, you kind of know what's coming up next.
I think that's one of the points of the first hour of the show is, we're just getting a lot of these behind the scenes type of stories that that was how things were done at that time. It is sometimes it's just done because of the low budget. Just radio. The audience doesn't. The listeners don't need to see what props are being used, but there's little gimmicks to make this certain noises, but you're giving us that filling in a lot of what we don't normally think about in the production of a show, and that's one of the things I really enjoy about your Twilight Zone, and you also like for example in Third from the Sun on pages 222 or 226. You have a little trivia question there about the same props appear in the opening scenes in the background of the control room. In the next Twilight Zone episode, I shot an arrow into the air inside the wrecked spaceship in People Are Like All Over in the laboratory in his image. And the initial glimpse of the flying saucer in this episode was a matte painting left over from the Forbidden Planet props at MGM. So there's like probably a lot of people just aren't watching a lot of these like binge watching this chronological series, and they may miss little facts like that. But there's you're talking about like for 2 episodes in a row, there's almost like the same sets are being used, and then throw in Forbidden Planet, and what Forbidden Planet has Robbie the Robot, and how many other Lost in Space and a couple Twilight Zone episodes. It's just these reoccurring themes is just just one of the fun aspects of having you as a guest and learning what was really going on. But it's just interesting where you take a color movie, and Forbidden Planet was very influential sci-fi movie, and then it's praised in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But it's also showing up in the Twilight Zone.
Correct. Yeah, and that's part of the fun of rewatching the episodes again for those who are big fans of the series. So, some shows like Twilight Zone are timeless, and people will watch them again and again over the years. Some get so fanatical they want to know every aspect, and they want to digest and eat up all that tidbits of material. And to me, it's fun if someone can bring one up I did not know. But it's nice also that people can discover how the episodes were made, what the original twist ending was supposed to be before it was revised because of production. All the little fun stuff there that it's good for further, deeper study. I always say there's usually can be 2 books on particular TV shows or radio shows. One would be critical analysis, and that's just somebody who watches them and then writes up an opinion, or basically spawning debate. And then the other would be the history of, and depends on how detailed they want to get into it, and that's tracking down all the cast and crew, finding interviews of cast and crew from before that who, are no longer with us, so we can get more detail about how this special effect was made and how that scene was done. An interesting one, my father-in-law, the episode you mentioned, Third from the Sun, is the one where the whole time you think it takes place on Earth, but there's always these little tiny differences that you don't realize. So it was the trick for the producers was, how do you make an episode that you would never think it's on an alien planet, so you cannot give the dead giveaway, but when it's all over, you go, oh yeah, you know what, I don't think that was Earth. So they had to do it just right. And the car, actually, you never see wheels spinning, and you kind of hear jet engines as it's moving, and the camera was tilted. I knew the car was something odd, so my father-in-law looked at it, and he said, it's modified, looks like a George Barris. And I said, okay, well, that's a start. Then I found George Barris's website, sent him a YouTube link through the email, and said, take a look, let me know if this is your car. Someone said it might be. And he responded back personally by email and said, I'll be darned. They used one of my cars off the set, and he said it must have been filmed at MGM, which it was. He goes, that's called the Blue Danube, and I did that car as like a 10 years into the future car. He said, for the movie The Time Machine. And he goes, that must have been 1960, because I got my cars back when they were done filming. Turns out they just snuck on the lot, grabbed the car, and used it without his permission, and he didn't even know until now. But it was one of those scenarios that, there's a little trivia. It's one of the cars that was from a Time Machine. So, like I said, there's always going to be little snippets here and there, but that's part of it. For me, as a researcher, historian, that's fun, digging those kind of trivia and tidbits up. I don't know about for the people who enjoy reading them. It's just, that's an interesting little story. If they thought listening to this was kind of interesting and amusing, imagine, 800-page book about the subject.
Well, it is just chock full of just all kinds of like the production costs, just like how the show is made, and you don't spare any details about all the actors, actresses, costs. Whereas film, it's you document the history of the series very masterfully, and since we have approaching 50 minutes left in the show, Martin said he'd be interested in doing a CD giveaway, and we're going to have to come up with a. Martin, do you want to explain the gift? And I think we're going to have someone who wants to call in, like the first person with the correct answer who calls in is going to win one of Martin's CDs. Martin, can you explain the prize you're offering?
Sure. The CD is an audio CD, so it's old radio shows. And what makes this CD unique these are recordings that were not available in collector hands. They're not out there. You really can't go to YouTube and find them because they were found in archives as I did research over the last 20 years from different places. And they usually, old radio shows come from 16-inch electrical transcription discs. And those discs are not easy to find. They're very fragile. And this particular CD has some recordings that we came across at various archives from writers, directors, family relatives of the old shows. One of them is the February 1940 audition recording of voice tests for Superman. Before the Superman radio show premiered, they had to do voice tests with different actors to play the role. So we decided, we found the recording, and we thought, that's pretty cool. We got to get it transferred. And then there's a Judy Canova show, which is a Christmas broadcast from 1949, and William Boyd plays Hopalong Cassidy on there, which is kind of a big plus. There's a lost episode of The Avenger from 1941, which was a pulp hero crime fighter. And then the disc opens up with half an episode of The Shadow from September 1941. And the only reason there's a half recording is because no recording fits complete on a disc. You have to have two discs. Part one's on one side, part two's on another. And they never had them on the very same disc. They were always two separate discs. Because during the broadcast live, they'd have the needle down, sort of like recording and putting it onto a record, but they don't want to miss a few seconds in the middle of the broadcast, flipping the disc over and putting it on the second side of the same disc. So they'd lift the needle up just as they're letting the needle down on the other recorder. So that's why there would always be two discs. Anyway, this one's an episode of The Shadow, as we were talking about The Shadow, but it's half an episode because the other disc is not known to exist. And for us collectors and fans, sometimes half an episode is better than no episode. So anyway, it's a CD, and it's got these 4 recordings. It's more than an hour in length. The voice auditions for Superman is pretty cool. And we had decided that besides the one, first person to call, we can also make them available on my website if they want to visit on the website and then just email me through the website. Just say you heard it on the program and here's your mailing address and I'll pop a CD in the mail for you. Or if they want to listen to them online, I can send them a special link and they can click a button and listen to it. But they can go to my website. We'll give my website later. But that's what the CD is. But we can give one away free for anyone who wants to call in and answer a question.
Okay. Do you have a trivia question that you'd like to ask, and about what just say the Twilight Zone, have someone call in. The number is 773-897-6114. Martin, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, we can give we'll give a fairly easy trivia question. The Twilight Zone episode called Living Doll had the killer doll called Talkie Tina. Telly Savalas was on the episode. The doll would go, "My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you." And it was a cute thing. The trivia contest is who did the voice of Talkie Tina?
There we go. That one stumped me. But Barbara, do you have an answer?
No, I was just about to cheat and Google it, to tell you the truth.
Don't do that.
Yeah. I did want you to shout it out, but I just wonder if you knew that one. I don't. Hopefully someone could want to call in and take a shot at it. I think one of the the number is 773-897-6114. So, Barbara says, stand by the phones. Hopefully, someone will want to call in. I'm sure there's some people Googling now too. but Martin, this year is the 60th anniversary of the inaugural season of the Twilight Zone, and probably all of us are going to be up at Binghamton in early October for this conference. You're going to be presenting there. Can you tell us a little bit more about this TZ at 60 conference?
Oh, yes. It is held in Rod Serling's hometown of Binghamton, New York. It's a nice little small town. He always said everyone has to have a hometown, and mine is Binghamton. It's at a hotel. You don't have to stay at the hotel if you're just going to drive over for a day. Worth going there, definitely. They screen some rare films. They're going to have some guest speakers talking. Some of them are historians and authors, and I think probably almost every historian or author of the Twilight Zone will be there, probably signing their books. I know I will be there with my book. There will be a whole bunch of little trivia contests and other stuff there for the Twilight Zone. There's a lot of fun things, and I remember last year they screened a movie Rod Serling wrote at the movie theater right across the street, which was really cool. But one aspect some people do, some people don't. It depends on how diehard of a Twilight Zone buff you are. You can actually browse through Binghamton. You could practically walk through from one end to the other within, 10, 20 minutes. It's a very small town. But you can actually see a lot of the landmarks that during first season episodes of the Twilight Zone were made referenced or used big time, like the carousel and the pavilion from walking distance. You can see Boscov's, which was where the thimble was with the mannequins and the after hours. And you can see the train station where Mirror Image was held. Rod Serling's own house where he grew up as a boy is there, and so on. So you could basically, besides the event, you can wander through, take pictures, and this is where this was inspired for this episode, and so on. And it's really cool to see and do. So it's an event. It's big because it's the 60th anniversary of the Twilight Zone. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty certain it's on the exact dates of the premiere too. It's like literally dead on perfect scheduling on the calendars. So if anyone wants to hobnob or meet all the historians, authors, and so on, I recommend they go check it out. It's called TZ at 60, and it's up in Binghamton, New York, and they can do a Google. I have a blog, and it'll be up on the blog in the next week or two. I know there's a poster promoting it and then some details and so on. So they can go check it out, and they'll get a kick out of it. It really is a lot of fun, especially if they like anything Rod Serling wrote or even the Twilight Zone in general.
Yeah, and all the authors, people who are doing the lectures, they're all really good people, fun. Just last year was just it was just a terrific weekend. We all had a really good time. There's Mike Pfeiffer and his the Rod Serling archive at the Bundy Museum, and last year and Serling was there, and that was a real treat to meet her, and she's just this like little petite lady. I just introduced myself and just having a normal conversation, and said something like, "Oh, you're I think your dad ought to be ranked up there with like Poe, Hawthorne, and Melville as America's greatest authors." I just try to say something. It's how much I admire her dad, and she just told me, it's like, "Oh, Dad would have been would have loved to hear you say something like that." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I just can't believe." I just heard that from Rod's daughter, and it's like, wow. I was just like really intimidated by her. But she that was a really fond memory of being there, and I plan on being there again. Barbara, we're gonna have to come over. Do you have any callers yet?
No callers yet, but you're talking about one of my favorite shows, which of course is Twilight Zone, but also Car 54, Where Are You? was also one of my favorite shows, as well as, you know, Paladin and some of the others. And you know, you're talking about it's kind of like it's an archive of history that so many people unfortunately didn't get a chance to enjoy, because I can remember listening to the radio and listening to, gosh, Fibber McGee and Molly and The Shadow and some of the other, I mean, that's where soap operas started even on radio. And it's a time frame that, you know, they seem simple, and yet they had to have such concise writing to keep everything into a short period of time. And when you look at movies and stuff today, and it takes, I don't know, 2-3 hours to develop a thought or an idea, and they did it in half an hour, and not really half an hour because they had commercials they had to work around. And the writing was spectacular on so many of these. Just my thought.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot of those that I find very enjoyable. I wouldn't say, 10 years ago I would have said they don't make television shows good anymore, but they've actually upped that quality now, and they've gotten very addicting. But some of the best television is the old television shows, and it's nice to know that there are places like MeTV that still air them, and people, I'm not the only one, that will go through the archives and document shows like Car 54 and Have Gun Will Travel and The Green Hornet and so on, and put together books on the history of those shows and how it all works out. And it works out good. And apparently a lot of fans, there's enough fans and a fan base out there that authors can keep writing books about them and doing research and keep digging that stuff up.
Well, the wonderful thing about it is so much of the stuff today becomes politically oriented, and that stuff wasn't. It was pure drama. It was pure comedy. There was no politics or religion or anything. It was pure entertainment. And, you know, you're not getting that so much anymore these days. Everybody has a comment.
Yeah, well, I've always believed that a social commentary is lacking in today's television shows. Back then you had heroes to aspire. Today we have anti-heroes. You know, the soccer mom that sells drugs to the school teacher who creates meth and sells it on the street. And they make characters that you actually root for and you don't want to see get busted and in trouble. And it's kind of like a different society these days, which is a bit sad, but I guess that's just the way it works. But back then, they were heroes that would, you know, they chose what was morally right and wrong. And so that's the way I like my shows more so. And they don't do that today, sadly.
No, one of my favorite shows was You Were There with, was it Edward R. Murrow? I forget who hosted it. But
I think it was Murrow, yeah.
Yeah, he took you back into historical events, and, you know, you were a reporter talking to people around the assassination of Lincoln or, you know, any number of things that happened in the past, and it was fascinating, and it was well done.
Oh, yes. You Are There, they used to play them in school, and so the kids could actually witness what looks like a live newscast where the reporter would go around with a microphone and interview as the historic events occurred, and it was a better way to educate kids and to have someone tell them and then hope the kids can remember by teaching. It was easier for them to see it via television or a short film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I think my favorite two Twilight Zones were the one that To Serve Man. I remember, loved that one. And the one with the soda fountain guy who they were talking about aliens, and, you know, the guy was saying they didn't exist, and the guy behind the soda fountain was, you know, saying, well, you never know, and then the guy leaves and he takes his hat off and there's a third eye under his hat. I mean, they did wonderful, wonderful shows, and they were totally entertaining.
Yeah, and I always said shows like The Twilight Zone can hold people's attention, but it's also timeless. I remember I was in a Starbucks once, and I was talking to somebody, and I just happened to mention Twilight Zone, and a bunch of the young kids, and they're all probably college at best. These young kids actually were all thrilled over just knowing that, oh, Twilight Zone, I like Twilight Zone. And I chalk that up not just to how good it is, but also the fact that to this day it is still being aired on television, which is how they got exposed to it. But even they think Twilight Zone is cool, and they must have, because if they got hooked on 2 or 3 episodes, they went and watched a whole bunch more. So they knew what that was by name. And so some of these programs, you know, people talk about Game of Thrones being the big deal of this year and so on, but the show went off the air. Let's see if that's still the buzz 20 years from now versus so many other programs that come around. But Twilight Zone will still always be a favorite.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know, but there were still some others that, and with Hopalong Cassidy, how could you forget that? You know, I don't remember any episodes, but I do remember Hopalong Cassidy.
Well, that was one of my favorite cowboy actors. But, again, that's on the bonus CD that we're giving away. That's on the Judy Canova show from December 24, 1949, which means on Christmas Eve, live radio. He was in the studio playing the role of Hopalong Cassidy to promote the franchise he had just bought. Historically, he had just bought the whole franchise and owned it right before that, and was getting ready to have his own radio show on the air. So he was trying to heavily keep up the name of Hopalong Cassidy, and was producing his own movies at the time. And pretty much he was kind of, I guess you could say, he had no money by that point, because he invested every penny he could to make the movies and buy the franchise. And end result is he died a very, very, very wealthy man.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it's just really fun. It's been a fun 90 minutes so far, and we still have some other material to get into for the next last 30 minutes. But it's just the longevity of these even though they're in reruns now, it's just that doing something right that has kept a show alive for 60 years or 50 years for Star Trek. There's just that touchstone element to all these different radio and TV shows we've spoken about. What the Shadow is on for over 20 years, but I'm sure so many, a large percentage of our listeners knew, the menacing laugh at the during the intro. It's just those little things that, I hope the listeners picked up on from, like, more from someone like you who's researched the artistic aspects of these shows, and you've been explaining why they've been around for so long, and that connection to the audience. I just hope that the listeners come away from this show with information like that in mind, and hopefully it helped them as they do, their writings or artwork or whatever type of humanities in which they are involved. So I don't know. It really wasn't a question. It was just kind of a rant.
No, it's a good rant, and it's a good opinion too.
But Martin, you're still working on another popular show. Yeah, I remember watching this one in reruns. Like after school, like third or fourth grade. But you're working on a book on the Lone Ranger series. Is that right? You're starting off with the radio show, and eventually was developed into a TV show.
Correct. Yeah. The Lone Ranger was it was a very popular children's program. It ran more than 20 years on radio, more than 20 years on TV through reruns, because it ran 5 years on TV. That was one of the handful of books that I'd say probably accumulative with my co-author and myself, more than 30 years of research. And we sat down this winter
Wow.
and hacked out the book, and it's going to be about 800 pages, and it only covers the first 5 years of the show. It's titled The Lone Ranger, The Early Years, 1933 to 1937. And the reasoning is that the show, they started recording them in February 1938. So the first 5 years, there's barely any recordings at all that exist. And that's what people would listen to, it's what people would love to know, and the fans. What about those early adventures? So we document the historic moments, like when Tonto commits a cold-blooded murder, when the Lone Ranger basically kicks down a door and guns down a bunch of Mexicans. It was a different rendition of the Ranger back then. And so today we thought it'd be nice to document the true creation and we reprint all the archival documents to back up every fact and quote. So all the myths and misconceptions can be debunked. And it's sadly another 800-page book. And like I said, I wish I could write thinner books. But it's been a long time in the works, and it's just about done. It's being proofread by people proofreading books now, go through it chapter by chapter. And that's about it, really. So it's just a book about the Lone Ranger, but it's an aspect that really has not been documented in most books, and when they do, they sadly are a little bit mistaken in their facts. So hopefully we will get that corrected now.
Okay, and speaking of, I don't know if it's really correction. I might need it just for my own understanding and clarity. But what does kemosabe mean?
Kemosabe means trusted friend. It was referenced a couple times on the radio, especially when it was first used.
Oh, really?
And then repeated over and over. The best part about the Ranger is... Sorry?
Is it a real word? Is that a real word?
Not really. It's spelled two different ways in the radio scripts, because a lot of times when words like that, they type them in the radio scripts to be phonetically pronounced properly. In other words, it'd be Sabi, it should be Sabe, just so that the actors would pronounce it proper during the air. But when it's in, like, say, novels, then it would be spelled the other way. The beauty of the Lone Ranger is that Franz Stryker was the continuity authority. He wrote most of the scripts. He wrote most of the novels, and so on. And the end result was he was able to maintain a continuity. So when there'd be a reference that Tonto was from the Potawatomi tribe, which was up in Michigan at that time, it was referenced at least 3 times during the 22 years it was on the air, but of course always accurately, because basically anything continuity was always left to Franz Stryker, in case in those later years when other writers came into play and started writing radio scripts and Fran Stryker was story editor, it was known that you could not change the lore or do anything like that because that was always up to Stryker. That way it maintained continuity. So Kimosabe meant trusted friend.
Okay, and you just mentioned the Potawatomi tribe from Michigan, and when we had Lon Krieger on a couple times, he did speak about their contributions to America's history with the garden beds. I'm just while you're going on with this information, just kind of having these little realizations about, oh wow, okay, we've had someone talk about that tribe as well. Said Tonto was from the Potawatomi tribe.
He was Potawatomi.
Okay, cool. Okay. I just remember seeing the show when I was little. I'm not a scholar of it, but I remember seeing it. It was a fun show to watch, and more we're down to like about 25 minutes or so. But speaking of all these fun shows we've been discussing this evening, you also produce these classic TV conventions, and just due to some circumstances, I couldn't get to the Baltimore area with Mike and Kenny, but what you have these conferences with you had Marianne. Was that last year? And
she was about 3 years ago, I think.
Okay, and you have a lot of really big, Dawn Wells and Marianne from Gilligan's Island, but you have numerous people talking about their work on these TV shows that all of us grew up watching, and you're doing the same thing again this year. Can you tell us a little bit about the conference you're producing this year?
Sure. It's a 3-day film festival. It's a nonprofit. It helps benefit children with treatable cancer. So what we do is we bring in a bunch of Hollywood celebrities, sometimes TV stars, and basically it's kind of like a film festival, really. We have movies playing 24 hours a day. We have slideshow seminars from 9 or 9:30 in the morning till about 9 o'clock at night, and then we play a special movie screening. An example would be this year we're playing The Man with the Golden Gun. It's a James Bond film, but both Bond girls from that film is actually going to be at the convention this year. So it seemed fitting for them to introduce the movie, talk about being Bond girls and their screen careers before we screen the movie. And then another night we have Russ Tamblyn and George Takiris, who was the leader of the Jets and the Sharks in West Side Story, the musical. So they'll introduce the film and they'll talk about their careers and so on as well. It's kind of like a fun interactive event. There's about 200 and some vendors selling old vintage memorabilia, and then, of course, as you were mentioning, there's usually about 15, 16 Hollywood celebrities and actors, screenwriters, directors, and so on. And they just sit there and they sign autographs and, again, raise money for charity. So it's a big event. It's grown. I think last year we hit past 4,000 people. We even have the Baltimore police wandering around just to maintain security. It's gotten to be that big. And it's a big event, and it's a good event, and it helps for a good cause.
Mm-hmm. And you have a website for that they want to look into the dates and directions. Can you give us the website for your classic TV show?
Event, yeah, it's called the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention. Basically, because it's held in the Mid-Atlantic area. The website is easy. It's www.midatlanticnostalgiaconvention.com. It's the name of the event. They can sign up for the free email newsletter if they want, and other cool stuff there. They can see the celebrities coming this year. They can see photos from past years and so on. The photos of the vendors and what the vendors are selling, that really is awesome. I mean, you can see a lot of cool nostalgia toys and collectibles there. Authors are doing slideshow seminars, so there's a schedule of events there. Some of them are museum curators, film preservationists at the Library of Congress. It's a big event. But the website, if they want to check it out, is www.midatlanticnostalgiaconvention.com. And I forgot to mention it is held September 12, 13, and 14 for 3 days. It's in Hunt Valley, Maryland. And in case anyone's wondering where that is in Maryland, if you were driving down I-83 south of Harrisburg, once you cross into the Maryland state line, the hotel is practically there, so you don't even go into or near Baltimore. In fact, it's a very nice area. The Ravens and Baltimore Orioles players all live pretty much, give or take, around Hunt Valley. So it's Hunt Valley, Maryland, September 12, 13, and 14.
Okay, and let's see, you have Tatum O'Neal there this year. Yeah, that that would be interesting to talk to her about. And she's actually in one of my favorite movies, is Paper Moon, and she and her dad Ryan O'Neal are actually her real life dad are actually playing. These con artists that Ryan's basically her dad, and she's a better con artist than her dad, and she's 8 years old in the movie. It's really that's that movie is made in like 73 or somewhere or thereabouts.
Correct. And she was 9. She was 9 years old when she did the movie, and she won I think she's the youngest person to ever win a competitive Academy Award, and it was her best. I think it was her best actress, not even best supporting actress. But I know she holds the record to this day as being the youngest to win a competitive Academy Award. It
really is an excellent movie, and we have looked at really the perfection, the top quality aspects of so many of these shows, and Paper Moon really is another aspect of an artist like Peter Bogdanovich paying really close attention to all the details of the settings to make it really look like Depression era, Kansas or Missouri, where the Midwest, where the movie's taking place. It's just I just find the story actually is and compelling.
To meet Tatum O'Neal. To meet Tatum O'Neal will be really, really cool, because we even talked to her. I think she's bringing her Oscar. So people can actually, if they wear a pair of gloves, can hold an actual original Oscar at the convention. I was surprised she actually said yes, but we've asked celebrities oddball stuff from time to time, like, hey, can you bring the original gun that was used on the show? And they would do it, and, sometimes be a complication or two, but she's supposedly bringing the original Oscar that she won for Paper Moon, and that'll be pretty awesome to be able to hold and stand next to her and so on, have your photo taken with her. But she is one of about 14 or 15, maybe even 16 movie stars coming this year. The big one we looked at is not Lee Grant or Nancy Kwan or anyone. It's Angie Dickinson for me, because she's done so many films from John Wayne Films. Probably the only original member of the Rat Pack still around.
Yeah, and let's see, Nancy Kwan is what? She was from Hawaii Five-0. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier in the show, and what other shows was Angie Dickinson in? Didn't she do something like with Telly Savalas?
You're probably thinking Kojak. She might have made a guest appearance on it. She was the star of Policewoman for 5 years on TV, and it was about the same time they were doing Kojak and all those other detectives at the time.
Yeah, that was like what Quincy was on. It's like I saw a lot of Quincy at my next door neighbor's house, since he was a doctor. So so I remember seeing that kind of lineup. But and Barry Williams from the Brady Bunch. That's Greg Brady.
Correct.
Right, and what in the past you've had who Cindy? Did she do her reprise her role as doing pork chops and applesauce?
Yeah, we've had in the past a lot of celebrities. Robert Conrad, Robert Wagner. We've had the cast of WKRP in Cincinnati, except Lonnie Anderson. She's coming this year now. We've had practically, I think we had the Bionic reunion with Lee Majors, Richard Anderson, and Lindsay Wagner together. That turned out to be the third time they were ever together since the show went off in '78. Usually it's one or two of them at a show, not all three. We just got lucky. And we've had Marsha Hunt, Margaret O'Brien, Celeste Holm, Ann Rutherford, Jodie Foster. We just had a large list of people who just happened to show up, and the celebrities come, like I said, to sell autographs and raise a lot of money. Shirley Jones was a very popular one once. Davy Jones was there, Karen Valentine. It's a nice lineup, but we've had quite a lot of people. Dawn Wells, as you mentioned, who was Marianne on Gilligan's Island. She was extremely popular. Line, like a lot of the celebrities, the lines just are nonstop. And I think a couple of years ago we had, it was either a couple of years ago or last year, we had Aileen Quinn. She was Annie in the musical, if you remember the movie Annie. It's a hard knock life for me. She was there, and she had a line that surprised a lot of us, the staff. We have to put the celebrities in certain areas of the hotel where if the lines are going to be so long, they'll go out the door and out the hotel, and then people can stand outside at the hotel, which is better than having them long lines in the hallways and blocking fire exits and making the fire marshal disappointed. And we did not anticipate her having a line that would never end. And we thought, she'll just be, there'll be the occasional family bringing their kids in. And no, that line just never ended. And we went, I think we got to move her tomorrow because we're okay today, but tomorrow there'll be even more people. And it has its moments, but it's quite fun. And it's nice to see the event running smoothly with the nicely well staffed, but we've raised a lot of money for children with treatable cancer. So the event continues to get bigger and bigger. And the best compliment I get is from people who go to other shows who say, this is way better than the other shows, and they even stop going to the other shows and decide to come just to ours because everything's a notch above, and they enjoyed it. So that we figure we have a good recipe. We are not going to change any of the ingredients.
Is there a certain theme you're developing with Britt Eklund and Maud Adams? Some of the couple of the Bond girls. Is there something there that you're developing?
Not for this year, no. Usually if there's a theme, it's some sort of anniversary. In other words, this year we're kind of highlighting a 70th anniversary of Dragnet. I think it's 70th anniversary of Dragnet, 50th anniversary of Woodstock. We highlight a type of movie each year. Last year we played a few film noir. This year we're highlighting old dark house murder mysteries. So people who like old dark house murder mysteries can enjoy that genre, because we're going to play a few rare oddballs of that genre. Next year I think we're going to probably focus on some westerns, because people seem to like westerns. It's a little bit for the Bond girls. It's because both of them, we always have a Bond girl or two every year, just because there's a large group of people who come every year because they like Bond girls. So as long as we keep bringing in a couple Bond girls, there's this large group of guys who keep coming in over and over. And both of them just happen to be the stars of The Man with the Golden Gun, because there was always two Bond girls per se in each Bond movie. One would be good and one would be bad. So in this case, we've got the good girl and the bad girl. So they'll introduce the film and talk about their careers before we screen it up on a big giant screen, which is fun, because then people can get their autograph with them, get a poster from that movie signed. They can get glossy photos, which are there. The glossy photos are free. Some people want their photos taken, but like I said, it's all for raising money for charity, and it's a good cause. So it's a great way to have fun and also do something good at the same time.
It is, Britt was in The Wicker Man. Is she going to talk about her role in that movie? That's like since we've been highly praising Psycho all night, the original Wicker Man is a close second to like Psycho and scary movies. Do you know she's planning on discussing?
Yes, she
the
will.
Wicker Man.
She will.
Wow.
Yes. And basically, what happens is whoever's in charge of doing the interviews will ask questions for about 20 minutes, usually about the main questions. And that was one of her big ones. And if he doesn't, it makes it easy, because then they turn questions over to the audience for about 20 minutes. And the stars try to give good answers, but they try not to give very long answers so they can get as many questions answered by the fans. Not that the fans cannot walk up to the table and just ask a question, and they don't have to get autographs. They can ask questions. That's what the stars are there for. But I'm sure if she does not get to talking about it on stage, anyone can ask her about the Wicker Man. But I'm pretty certain someone's going to bring it up if it's not brought up beforehand. But that's part of the fun. Is, like I said, the interaction where the fans can actually ask the celebrities questions.
Well, that sounds interesting. Okay, so you have the long-awaited appearance of Lonnie Anderson from WKRP in Cincinnati. There, you finally got got her there, what are you anticipating from Lonnie?
From Lonnie, just a nice Q&A. She'll be signing autographs, answering questions, posing for photos with the fans that fans can, they'll share on Facebook and all those. If you've ever seen photos with people and celebrities and wondered where they got the photos, a lot of times it's at conventions like these. And we had, I think, we had Tim Reed, Howard Hessman, and Jan Smithers last year. Lonnie Anderson was supposed to come to make it a nice cast reunion, but the problem was Burt Reynolds had passed away, and she had to be there for the funeral and all. She had to stay, and it was just bad. It was timing. So she said, no, I'll make it the next year. And granted, we don't have the other three at the same weekend, but on the plus side, anyone who got let's say they got a photo and they got a staff cast photo and they got them signed by all three, they can bring the photo back, and now Lonnie Anderson will sign it, and they can keep gathering their photos. Or they can just meet her. I would imagine most people wanted to meet her before any of the others all combined, because there were so many people who showed up and then discovered, oh, she canceled. Well, that makes sense. Some people actually anticipated it because when they heard the Burt Reynolds passed away. But it happens. It's sadly. But they can check out the website and see all the celebrities coming this year, because I know I'm missing some. It's www.
Richard Thomas.
Yep.
From the Waltons. Okay, and we're down to 3 minutes or so. What are all the websites again? I guess we didn't have any callers for the trivia question, but Martin, what's your personal website and the classic TV website?
Sure. It's my website is martingrams.com. They can Google that if they can't find it, in case they're not getting my name spelled. It's a little tricky. It's Grams, like the weight. That's my website, martingrams.com. And the other one is the convention website, www.midatlanticnostalgiaconvention.com. And they'll give them, those websites will give them a little bit of everything that they want to look at. Samples from the books, dates, free emails and blogs, and lots of fun stuff to check out. So plenty of things to read and see and do on the sites.
Okay. Hey, Barbara, I know we're down to about 2 minutes. Do you want to wrap up the show? Provides your benediction before we we'll be on tomorrow afternoon from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern with a special show. But Barbara, okay, go ahead, Barbara. Wrap it up.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I hope you've had as much fun as I have listening. I even took some notes, and I'm going to check out the website. Absolutely, again, I browsed through it a little bit earlier today, and it's a fascinating website. You will get lost in it, and so will your memory get lost in the times that we've lived through. We do have another show tomorrow, and again next week, Monday and Tuesday. Please check in with us. If you check my website, you'll see when the shows are, and you'll be able to join us there, or you'll be able to join us on YouTube. That said, thanks a lot for being here and listening and sharing your evening with us. We'll see you all soon. Good night.